It begins in a state of blissful nothingness. There's a warmth and a serenity that's enveloping you. Everything's at peace. And suddenly, your eyes dart open. Everything's still dark and peaceful, yet the lights are on in your mind. You quickly scan your surroundings and you try to imagine what it must have been that caused your eyes to open here in what appears to be the middle of the night. Your first semi-lucid thought or habitual action would be to maybe check your wrist for the time, or if you don't happen to wear a watch to bed, maybe you're reaching over to your desk drawer and tapping on your phone. You need to see with your own eyes how off schedule you are in this moment and how much opportunity you have to get back on track and get back into that peaceful space. You may have had several nights in a row this way, and each one gets more and more frustrating as the same scenario plays itself out. And you're just worrying in the back of your mind that when you look at this number on the clock, it's going to say what you're afraid it's going to say. And sure enough, you're inevitably confronted with that reality that you still have hours and hours before you're supposed to be awake. And if you're anything like me, your next thought is going to be, how can I convince what's going on internally that what we're witnessing right now doesn't need to be the scenario? We can pretend like none of this ever happened. Maybe we can go to the bathroom. Maybe we can reestablish ourselves and try to get those perfect conditions. Maybe we change our position. Maybe we find the cool side of the pillow and we just close our eyes. We take deep breaths. We do our, breathing techniques, and we're going to win this argument against our mind that it's time to go back to sleep, right? Wrong. Try as we might, as diligently as we plead our case, our mind will not rest. Hey there, it's great to see you. I'd like to talk to you about insomnia today if you have a few minutes. Have you ever looked into any root causes of your insomnia? I'd love to hear about your story below and any revelations that you've experienced on your journey. I think there are any number of multitudes of reasons why any one of us suffers from this affliction throughout the course of our lives. And I've realized that as often as this occurs in my own life, that I've never actually tried to put a theory together that's going to help me untangle the problem at its source, until this most recent bout, that is. So let me tell you about what happened, how I recognized that I was embodying a pilot on a grounded flight, and what steps actually led me to a predictable takeoff. Usually what happens after this process of maybe 30 minutes to upwards of 3 hours where I'm trying to pretend like I'm going to go back to sleep is in the front of my mind, I'm really putting the problem set together of all the tasks that I'm going to be accomplishing with all the extra hours and focus that I'm going to have in the morning. I try to look on the bright side. Okay, I'm up before anyone else in the house is awake. I'm often up before anyone else in the community is awake. So I have all this peacefulness that I can use to my advantage. I could get restarted on some routines. I could maybe start the day with a cold shower, or I could lift some weights, or I could get some cardio in, or I could have a really nice and responsible and hearty breakfast, right? Or maybe it's the beginning of the month, or maybe it's the beginning of a year, like it happens to be, in this current season. And I can think about projecting myself into the future about, some of those bigger goals that I have. I'm a software engineer by trade, and a lot of me has all of these visions of side projects that I could be working on and squeezing into in the corners of my day. And lucky for me, I happen to have an extra corner in this particular day that I could stuff some value into, right? But invariably, the following sequence of events occurs. I slowly kind of roll myself into an upright position. I am grabbing my devices and my water, and I'm checking my surroundings, and I'm trying to avoid the creaky slab of wood in the bedroom so that I don't wake my wife up. I'm gently, ever so gently, like a thief in the night, peeling the the door handle, right? And we have this, I think it's paint or something in the hinge of the door and it never fails. Every time you open it, if you open it at a certain velocity, you'll get this giant crack at a certain point in the arc of the door. So what I've found to mitigate that is you have to be so careful and attentive to the force you're exerting as you're pulling back on that handle, right? And so, I made it out of the bedroom, right? The next step is I'm on the other side and I got to make sure I close the door and I get it latched, and I don't want the latch to click. So I have to have the right force, against the door again before I then turn the handle closed, and then I gently release, right? And the next and final hurdle on my destination to a productivity paradise is my son's bedroom door on my right. The walls never feel so thin as they do when you're up before dawn and you're trying to make zero noise in the entirety of your house, right? It's in this moment that I can hear my son deep breathing, even though his crib is like across the room on the other side, right? I can hear his noise machine, but it's not doing enough work for me to feel like there's this separation that gives me complete comfort that I can just stroll on through without any thought whatsoever and just ensure that he's going to be staying asleep. And at this point, I'm kind of cursing my luck that we ended up buying an older house. So as the seasons progress, different parts of the house react different ways, right? And in the hallway that's passing along my son's room upstairs seems to be one of the most chaotic in terms of the settlement issues that the house has. You can never be 100% certain which step you take in which location of this hallway is going to produce the least amount of noise. So it's this series of testing the waters with each step you take. You put a little bit more pressure on it, and if you hear any sort of reaction at all, you immediately undo that decision and you readjust your foot. You move it a little further forward, a little further behind, or maybe you're just giving up entirely on that section and you're going to move to the other section, right? It ends up looking like a game of Twister, I imagine, where I've got like right foot on red and left foot on yellow on the other side of the hall, right? If luck is on my side on this particular trip, I will have made it with minimal audio evidence to the other side of my son's door. I'm not done though, because right in front of me at this point is a baby gate. And obviously this is to help prevent our son from waking up in the middle of the night and just thinking he's going to stroll down our stairs in the middle of the darkness, right? But this thing has seen some use at this point. My son's 3 going on 4, and we've had a lot of retractions and expansions, and we didn't buy it because of the quietness level. So it's a really great thing for our sanity in the daytime hours. But here in this early morning dark moment, it stands as this really awkward and abrasive and squeaky utensil that I have to kind of maneuver around. But I have a lot of experience doing that at this point. I'm a chronic early riser, right? So inevitably I'll get past this step. And then I face the final boss. Our stairs are the noisiest, most inconvenient mechanism to move from one section of the house to the other that I could ever imagine. I remember when we toured the house, walking through everything, just thinking about how the biggest potential deal breaker that I saw was the noise level of these stairs. That I'm going to be walking up these stairs and everyone in the house is going to know about it. So I've developed this really interesting technique at this point. I get past the baby gate and then I turn to face what would be my son's bedroom and my wife and I's bedroom, right? The way that I came, I'm facing away from the stairs, right? I will grab the handrail with both hands. I'm going to step off into the open air and I'm going to get 3 steps under me, right? And I'm going to stretch and stretch and I'm going to get down to that 3rd step, right? And it's going to make some kind of noise when I put my weight on it. The more steps that I clear with each step that I take, the fewer noises in total I'm going to make. So some days I feel a little more mobile than on other days. And on those days, I can clear the steps in 2 steps. Most of the time it takes me 3 though. So if I can get these 3 steps behind me simply enough without hearing any sort of ramifications of my decision making, then I'm gold. So now that the final boss was cleared, I am in the clear. I can go grab my coffee. I can grab my work computer or whatever, mechanism I've decided. Maybe it's a personal computer, depending on the, plan that I've made for my early morning hours. Maybe it's like my journal. Maybe it's a towel so that I can go hit my shower. Maybe I've got my workout gear and I can go do a row or something. Inevitably though, my goals begin and end with that coffee. I'll grab the coffee out of the fridge. I do cold brew, so every night there's one just waiting for me, right? I'll sip it and I'll kind of just stare into the darkness and think to myself, I'd really like to just enjoy my coffee for a little bit before I get going on the thing that I plan to get going on. And this is 9 times out of 10 what happens. I'll sit on the couch, I will pull my phone out and I'll be doom scrolling. Or maybe I'll decide, you know what? I can always do that thing that I plan to do later. So let me just flip on a game. I never get to play games anymore. I'm a dad. I'm either working or, developing some project. And the living room is usually taken. So there's this golden opportunity to like game on the big screen. So why not take that in this moment? And I'll find myself in these moments promising to myself, it'll just be like a 30-minute start, or a 45-minute start. And as the clock goes on, I'll be staring at the clock as it advances closer. And as the sun begins to rise and fill the room, and it starts to look more and more like the state of things as if the day had begun in a normal way, right? And next thing I know, my son's alarm is going off upstairs and the day kicks into motion. And that's kind of exactly how my most recent bout of insomnia played out. Over the course of maybe 4 or 5 days, I was doing this exact process basically every day. The variable wasn't if I was going to wake up normally or not. It was going to be how abnormally was I going to wake up and how much time was I going to inevitably waste on the other side of that wake up. Well, I want to tell you about this one morning. Actually, it was 2 mornings ago at this point. I want to tell you about this morning because I woke up and I was immediately in this position to be reflecting on this issue that I was having. Usually, I'm thinking more about the day ahead, right? What am I going to do, now that I've got this extra time after I get over the mild frustration of just here I am again on this no sleep train? Well, 2 mornings ago, I sat in my bed and I was just thinking about not sleeping. Like I was just inquiring in my mind, like, why are you waking up right now? I was literally quizzing myself and I wasn't going to take silence for an answer. So I spent a good 5-10 minutes in this early state while I'm still in bed after I did the whole song and dance about trying to put myself back to sleep and convince myself. And the strangest thing rose to the surface in response to this inquiry. I heard back from myself, "You are not your job." And I thought, that's a really strange response to this line of inquiry. Like, why can't I sleep? And the response is, "You are not your job?" What does that even mean? I know I'm not my job, but why now? Why this? So in that moment, I resolved to get downstairs and do my, aerobatics. And I'm going to sit instead of trying to do anything else, nothing productive, nothing even sedative, right? I am going to sit and think about this line of inquiry, and I'm going to just pull on the thread gently and see where it follows. And so I end up doing just that. I don't even get my coffee. I just grab my water bottle here that's always on my mantle on my bedside, right? And I just take it downstairs. No phone, no nothing. I just take my water downstairs and I resolve to figure this out. Do you ever just sit in silence and see what surfaces? I found often that really important things come to the surface when you allow them to. I'd love for you to tell me about any particular revelations that you've experienced in, moments of silence. It'd be great to hear your story if you leave me a comment below. So I sit on the couch and I think about this. You are not your job. Why is this coming right now? Why is this surfacing? And I'm rifling through things in my mind. And I recognize there was a little byline at my job the day before about one of my colleagues that it was announced that this was going to be his last week here at the job that we work at together. Now, this isn't an uncommon thing at the workplace, right? But this particular colleague was different because we both entered into this job together, essentially. And it's been years and years at this point. We weren't really working closely together or even directly really on the same projects. But there was still this camaraderie there and this sort of connective tissue. And things felt comfortable and familiar. And so I was thinking about that message in this moment, right? And I remember having this real sincere moment of just complete shock. This moment of shock is the next thing that I end up focusing on, right? The first thing was, you're not your job, right? And I was going through this journey of what you're not your job meant. And then I found this next moment that stood out to me in kind of a similar way. And it was this shock that I felt at the revelation in this fairly innocuous Slack message. And so I asked myself, what's so interesting about this moment of shock? And why this moment of shock to begin with? And what that line of inquiry leads me to was this notion that nothing is permanent in life. For as long as my colleague and I have worked together, and as familiar as I've become with the surroundings of my workplace, there's a lot that's changing in technology, even right now, right? With AI, It's really hard to imagine what the type of job that I'm doing now is even going to look like next year, certainly in 10 years' time. And who I'm doing that job with. It changes sort of continually, but there are these sort of buoys in that ocean of change that you kind of rely on and you kind of come to take for granted to some extent. And that's what was hitting me in this moment of shock, is that I was being confronted with this finiteness of things, right? That's the next moment. That's the next place that I land on with this thread. What strikes me so much in this moment about the finiteness of things? That's the next thing that I ask myself. Well, if you follow this channel, you might remember a video that I released a little while ago that talked about the catastrophic ice storm in Nashville that we had recently experienced. Well, at the time of this recording, it's only been about a week since that happened. And at the time of, the events of my insomnia inquiry, it was even less than that. And I recognized that I hadn't taken really much stock in really reconciling the feelings that I was feeling in those 30 plus hours without power in the freezing cold. It wasn't just that things change at work, right? It was that things can change at home drastically. Everything can be fine in one moment, and suddenly, without any sort of preparation, circumstances can change to where even in your home, things are drastically different and potentially uncertain. And I keep thinking about this moment about my son's face getting redder and redder, his cheeks in particular. They got redder and redder over the course of these 30 hours as the temperature in our house dropped. And so that's my next line of inquiry, right? My son's cheeks, essentially. I'm thinking about that. It was a really visceral thing for me in the moment, and I'm reprocessing it in this moment. I don't think I'd ever been so scared in my life, certainly as a parent, as I was in those 30 hours, not knowing how I was going to be able to keep my son alive and happy and healthy. And that leads me immediately to a week before that or so, when I'm giving my son a hug goodbye as I go drive up north to go tell my dad goodbye as he's in the final stages of his life. I end up getting to see my dad and spend some time with him in his final moments. And I'm there with him when he takes his last breath. And I have a lot of solace, even in the complexities of our relationship. I have a lot of gratitude that I was able to experience that and be a part of that with him. But I recognize it's not even 2 weeks since the events played out at this point. And I've been through so much in that 2 weeks. And even leading up to that 2 weeks, it was a pretty complicated sequence of events, of backs and forths and communication and, decision making and things that were happening as my dad's life was coming to a close. And so suddenly this little thread of inquiry, I keep following it and following it. Maybe it's more appropriate to call it maybe breadcrumbs. I'm following the breadcrumbs. And then I see this forest in front of me all of a sudden of unprocessed emotional content, And suddenly I understand immediately why I've been waking myself up these early mornings. I am grieving. I'm grieving in so many ways. I'm grieving for my father. I'm grieving for the relationship that I've had up to this point with my colleague. I'm grieving for my lack of preparation as a parent. I'm grieving for the city of Nashville. I'm grieving for the finiteness of life. And I'm not even sure how long I'm staring into the darkness in my living room at this point, but I decide to allow myself to stare at the forest, to stare at each individual tree in that forest, to recognize that it's there, to not skip past it, to not busy myself with some kind of vanity project or something that I'm really elevating in importance. And I find myself with each tree examining the grief that's there in finding a way to move forward in some small way with each issue that sprouted up for me. With my dad, he may be gone, but I still have sisters. And what I decide to do in this moment is check in with those sisters, see how they're doing with all this. With my son, I decide this is going to be one of the most intentional mornings that I've ever had with him. I'm making him breakfast as I always do, giving him his apple juice. I'm sipping my coffee. We're playing with trucks. But I'm there 100%, I'm not thinking about the day ahead. I'm not thinking about all the responsibilities I'm lumping on myself. I'm not thinking about all the mistakes I made. I'm fully present with my son, and I'm making sure that he knows that he's the most special thing in the world. And I've resolved to, as work begins, schedule a one on one with my friend and colleague. I want to hear from the horse's mouth, the circumstances that led to his decision to leave. And I just want to check in with him and make sure everything's okay. During the course of that day, I do all these three things that I have resolved to do. I end with the conversation with my colleague. And I close the Zoom conference call that we had, and I exhale and I think, everybody's okay. Everything's going to be all right. I hadn't even recognized how heavy things were feeling for me up to that point. I had this issue in my back and a creeping issue in my neck, and that happens to me so often when I'm going through rounds of burnout and stress that I kind of almost unconsciously process it as like normal. Oh, and I even did a thing for that. I got a back massager. It's really awkward. I've never had a massage in my life, but I think I'm in this season where I need to pay attention to the issues that are kind of staring me in the face and not try to navigate around them on the journey to some destination that is going to end up being not that important at the end of the day. All that is to say, I lay down in my bed and I do a relax mode back massage. And I think about the forest of emotions and grief and transformation that I have borne witness to in the last few months. And the exhaustion sweeps over immediately. I just want to hop in bed and tell my wife I love her and have a good sleep. And that's exactly what happens. My eyes open up the next morning and there's sunlight kind of blasting through the windows in our bedroom. And I hear the birds and I hear my son's feet stomping because his alarm has gone off, and he's meeting me in the bedroom with a big smile on his face. And I'm grateful. So I know there are many circumstances that many of us face that may cause issues with sleep. But I found, and I believe this to be true, at least in this particular case, but I think in a majority of cases, the issues for me are psychological issues. They're issues of my unconscious mind trying to surface things to me that I need to examine and confront in my conscious mind. So I would encourage you, if you're in the middle of your own bout of sleepless nights, to not busy yourself as an anesthetic, right? I would really ask for you to inquire within yourself and find a thread that you can pull on. I feel like it will jump out at you if you allow it to. And you need to have the courage to follow that thread wherever it takes you. And what you might find, like I did, is that you're like this pilot in charge of this Boeing 747. I don't even know if that's a kind of plane or not, but you're in charge of this giant aircraft, right? And your mind is in the sky, or maybe your mind is even at the destination that's on the other side of the continent, right? And every day or every hour or every minute that you're not on schedule is a day or hour or minute that you're beating yourself up about what you could and should be doing. And for whatever reason, mostly it all feels out of your control. The plane is grounded. Maybe there's debris in the runway, or maybe there's a bomb threat or whatever it is. But you're being forced into this scenario that makes you feel like you're just stuck and you're caged and you're bound. So what I realized in my most recent bout of insomnia was that my habits of productivity and milestone setting and achievement, well, they were actually fighting with my grief that I needed to explore. And they were creating this conflict in my mind and body that I couldn't overcome. And the more I fought with my routines and my objectives, the more my subconscious mind fought back. So I was actually intentionally grounding myself without realizing it. So please examine your own life and look for these mechanisms in which you are potentially battling yourself and having your own intentional grounding. So I spoke earlier about that ice storm in Nashville, right? Well, I think there's a ton of threads and, valuable lessons to kind of explore there. And I'd love to have you along with me if you have a few more minutes. So please check that video out next. I've really enjoyed exploring the forest with you today. I hope you sleep well and have sweet dreams, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for watching.